We've got a few weeks left in our series entitled Blockage, and for those who might be guests today, let me explain the purpose of this series. All we're trying to do is ask the Bible, and specifically the New Testament, which is the Bible written during the time of Jesus or about the time of Jesus and after the time of Jesus, what are the most common things that get in the way of human beings growing or developing spiritually? What are the things that get in the way of a Christian person growing the way that they want to or they hear about in church week after week after week? We want to find out what they are so that if they're present in our life, we can remove them or we can avoid them down the road. Here's a little aphorism that you can keep in mind about the purpose of the series. You never in your life want to build a wall over which you yourself have to climb. So much of what we've talked about in this series, whether it's at some point in your life having to trust God more than you trust your own senses and your own ability to figure things out, or trusting that He really loves you even when it seems like He doesn't, these are walls, if we're not careful, that we can build over which we ourselves have to climb. And some people build those walls so high they don't ever get over. That's what blockage is all about. What are the walls that we build in our life that stop us from growing the way that God wants us to and the way that we long to? We got a couple more that we're going to talk about, very common in your Bible, talked about a lot. And here's the one we're going to talk about today. To do so, we have to return to a passage that, if you were here a few weeks ago, will be familiar to you. I told you that we would come back to it. We talked about these verses from a letter written around 60 A.D. by someone named Paul, who is responsible for starting most of the churches in the first generation of Christians. He wrote this to a church in southwest Turkey in the town of Ephesus. And we're going to talk about today the half that we didn't cover the first time. He writes to these Christians, "This is not the way you learned Christ, the way that they were behaving toward one another. For surely you have heard and were taught about Him, because the truth is in Jesus. You were taught to take off your former way of life, your old self, corrupt and deluded by its passions, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to clothe yourself with a new self, created according to the likeness of God in true justice or righteousness and holiness." Well, here's what we're going to talk about today. Here are the pieces we left out the first time we went around through this passage. He says that we're supposed to take off our old self. We talked about that. But then he characterizes the old self, the old person that we were before Jesus. And he says it has the trait of being corrupt and deluded by its passions or lusts. And then he says you need to put on the new self. We talked about that the first time we went through this passage. But you do it by being renewed in the spirit of your mind. In those two phrases, in that contrast, you will find another very common spiritual blockage. You're supposed to do away with the passions and the drives that undermine, poison, and delude you. These are common spiritual blockages for everybody in the room. Now here's what you can't tell about that ancient Greek word passions in Ephesians chapter 4. It actually means that these passions or drives or impulses come from a certain place. And you can see it in another verse where the same word is used. Same writer in Romans chapter 6, verse 12 says, "Don't let sin therefore rule in your mortal bodies, by which I mean don't obey its passions." What passions? The passions of your body. So these are physical or physiological things. So if we wanted to restate what I have on the top of the screen, you would say it this way. What Paul is saying in Ephesians chapter 4 is that a very common spiritual blockage for all of us are what he would call bodily passions. Instincts, reactions, drives that everybody in the room who's a human being and has a body has. And we have to get past them, or, his language, take them off. And you do that by renewing your mind, by changing and reprioritizing what you think about to something completely new that you didn't have before you encountered Jesus. So fundamentally, Paul is describing here that you, in the course of your lifetime, are going to fight a battle between your mind and your body. Your mind and your bodily instincts. And if you're not wary of, or at the very least aware of, this struggle, you're going to get blocked at some point, and you may not even know why. So let's talk about what we're supposed to avoid or put off. Let's start where Paul does, the first half of the contrast or the equation. Take off your bodily passions, drives, impulses, instincts. This leads me to ask you, what are yours? Do you know? Now see, at this point, oftentimes in settings like this, you will hear people like me, preachers like me, go on and on about the sins that human beings commit. Well, this is not about generic sin. This is not about generalized sin. This is about something more specific than that. These are the errors that your body leads you to. These are the mistakes that your body is behind. You see that that's way more specific than the general idea of sin. This is not about sex, although sex is a basic human instinct. It's more fundamental than that, and it's more varied than that. Can you identify your body's impulses, instincts, and drives that pull you too often in the wrong direction or stop you from being who you want to be? I'll tell you what, let's not guess. One of the beauties here is that we have advanced far enough, scientifically speaking, that we can talk about medically, physiologically, neurologically what some of your impulses are. Everybody in the room and where they come from. So let's tap into the wisdom of modern science about what ancient Paul meant about your bodily passions. Let me talk to you about three things that we know fit into Paul's category, that everybody in the room is subject to. First, neuroscience would tell you that the most traumatic things that have happened to you in your life have shaped you. And that's not psychological, though that's true as well. It's neurological. That's about your brain. The things that have hurt you the most, the people who have hurt you the most. If you could pick on one hand the 2 or 3 or 5 people or circumstances in your life that bruised you the worst, here's what we know. They dug ruts in your brain that are very hard to get out of. You have a best friend, someone who you loved deeply for 20 years, and after 20 years, they abruptly and devastatingly left you. And they were mean-spirited about it when they left. Guess what? You are going to have a hard time trusting anybody that much again just because your brain was impacted so negatively. This is bodily. It is not just emotional or psychological. Your traumas affect how your body processes things, how you see things, your perspective on things. In the words of Paul, your traumas create your bodily passions. Guess what? So do your pleasures. And it works the same way. It even uses the same pathways in the brain. What you enjoy the most in your life, your brain wants more of instinctively. And so it's going to tell you the next time you're thinking about doing whatever it is that you enjoy, oh yeah, you really want to do that. And so you do it again. And guess what? It wants more of it. And you do it again. And guess what? It wants more of it. And every time you do it more and more, you enjoy it less and less. This, of course, is how addiction works. You can see that, right? Yeah, this is also how a hobby becomes an obsession. This is how somebody who loves their dirt bike 2 years later has to be out every single hour of every single weekend during the summer riding that dirt bike. It is physiological or neurological. It is not just behavioral. It is a bodily passion. What did I do? You guys are totally laughing.
Did I tell you?
No, it's totally.
No,
No, somebody got a dirt bike today. Okay. The peanut gallery threw me off up here. So you follow me? We don't have to guess at what bodily passions are. We know from modern science that part of your bodily passions are shaped by what you enjoy the most and how you've been hurt the most. These are the things that end up driving you. These are the things that end up creating your instinctive responses to things. Here's another one. And this is more generalized than what I just said. Anything you repeat, it becomes easier to repeat. This is the science of habit. And this is physiological, not just psychological. This is something that occurs in your brain. So, parents, your kids don't clean their room. Repeatedly, routinely. I am sure none of you have this happen. And by the way, parents, I'm sure that all of your rooms are spick and span clean, right? So your kids don't clean their room. How do you respond? You yell. You pitch a fit. I have a job. I pay the mortgage on this house. You are lucky that you get to live in it. Would you please go clean the only space that you're responsible for in this house? Okay, right? Okay, guess what? The more you respond to that situation that way, the more likely it becomes you're going to do it the next time it happens. And this is not a choice. You don't get to choose this. This happens in every brain in the room. Okay? So the more you do it, the more likely you will do it again. By the way, their response to you is also the same way. When they seem like they don't care that you're yelling at them for the 10th time in 10 weeks to clean their room, it's because the same thing has happened inside of them. And they have very, neurochemically speaking, turned you off. And they just don't hear it. You follow me? Your bodily passions are whatever you repeat. So if you respond to a situation in a bad way enough over time, that becomes your bodily passion. That's what Paul's talking about. So it can be anger, it can be distress. You know people who get detached, right? Somebody in the room gets emotional or expresses hurt, and you watch them change instantly, and what they do is step back and disengage emotionally. Do you know that that's a physiological response? Very likely this kind of thing happening. All of this is your bodily passion. It is your bodily drive. Here's one more. Anxiety, worry, stress, fear, anger, and things like that very literally short-circuit your brain. You can't think. Now, all of you have had that experience, and we're going to talk about your personal experience with this in a minute. But medically speaking, this goes on in every life in the room. I put you in a high-stress environment, and what's going to happen is you're going to really struggle to stay calm, at peace, even-keeled, be wise and think things through, and it's just how your brain works. In those high-stress moments, or when you're really afraid, or you've been really stressed for a really long time about something, your lower brain starts working more, and your higher brain starts working less. And guess what? This is what 2,000 years ago Paul was talking about. These are bodily passions. You don't get to choose whether or not in a high-stress, high-anxiety situation your brain seems to fuzz out and you can't make it work. This is just who we are. So now I want to ask you again. Now that maybe you're a little better educated about how your brain and your body actually is wired and how it works, what are your bodily passions? Paul says it is exceedingly important to your growth that you can identify what they are. Otherwise, they're going to get in the way of you going where God and you both want to go. This new self that is created in God's image, those are the words that Paul uses in Ephesians 4. What are your bodily passions? What are those situations or what people cause you to have what I just described happen to you? Where you can no longer think straight, you feel like you lose the ability to choose how you're going to respond. Those are your bodily passions. What are the things that have happened to you the worst in your life? Guess what? They have shaped you. They have shaped how you respond. You don't even think anymore about how they've shaped you. You just do it. You've learned to distrust people. You've learned not to extend yourself to people because you've been hurt. And you don't even question it anymore. These are your bodily passions. Some of you live with them every day. You live with the cost of high stress and high anxiety. You live with the cost of being afraid every day. And Paul says at some point, you got to do the battle and do the work to take off those old clothes, or they are going to hold you back. And I hope you get it. I'm talking about everybody in the room. There is no one exempt, no matter how long you've been in church, no matter how long you've loved Jesus, no matter how much you've grown to date. This is about you getting past what is natural to your body and how so often it works against where you want to go and who you want to be. You see it? Funny thing happened to me. I'll share this very personal story with you. You probably get that. I'm a pretty big guy, pretty muscular guy, was always an outdoorsman, very rugged, very high pain tolerance, kind of one of those guys where you can take anything that comes at you. And through what I've experienced as a pastor, that has physiologically changed for me. I can't anymore. I can't do what I used to do. I can't take on my shoulders what I used to take on my shoulders. I developed about 3 years ago a tremor in my hand. And nobody notices it because I hold my hand when I get real stressed and they don't see it. And it's simply because my brain took so much stress and so much anxiety so long that it's become a bodily reaction. And it's embarrassing to me that so much happened and I was hurt enough that now my body isn't giving me a choice about how I react. Yeah, that's my bodily passion. I get so much more afraid now than I used to because of what I've been through. I trust myself a lot less. My self-confidence has been deeply damaged. And all of this for me are my bodily passions. This happened to me, this happened to my body, this happened to my brain. These are my ruts. These are the things that God, with his help, is going to get me over. Now, like I said, I'm talking about everybody in the room. You have your story too. What are your bodily passions? Because you have them. And just like for me, they will get in the way of you being who God has called you to be. So here's the flip side. You are supposed to take off what Paul calls your bodily passions. We've talked at length about what those might be. You're going to get a chance this week, and I hope you take me up on it, to do some homework and get even more specific about you yourself and how they show up in your life. Because me talking about it for 30 minutes on a Sunday does not do it justice. The flip side is that you are supposed to renew your mind. You're supposed to be renewed in the spirit of your mind, which then will allow you to be clothed in the new self that God is trying to make in you. So to not be blocked by what comes natural to your body, you are going to have to put on or find a new way of thinking. Now, the key here is the word new. This is not going to come natural to you. If you were here last week, we talked about something else that doesn't come naturally to human beings, and that's humility. In the words of Peter in 1 Peter 5, this is the same way. What comes natural to you are all those bodily instincts and drives that I was just talking about. What does not come natural to you is thinking like Jesus would want you to think in any given situation. It takes work. It's like learning a foreign language. You don't know it, and you have to learn it. And it's not easy. In fact, let me show you how not easy it is from the pages of Scripture. This is how hard it is to fight against the natural instincts of your body and how they shape your behavior and your thinking. This is the same guy, St. Paul, writing in a different letter of his about his own fight against his body. Please note his word choice. In order for him to get where he wants to go as a Christian person, and in this case he references his ability to be a good pastor, these are his words. He has to beat up his body. Now, did he do that physically? I doubt it. But apparently the struggle felt strong enough that it felt like he was in a boxing match with his body, that they were trading body blows against one another, and he had to work that hard at it. And I suspect no one in the room, myself included, consider us on his spiritual level. These are the words of Jesus. If you've never understood what this very strange passage means, it has to do with the body and how hard it is to fight against it. Jesus says in the verse prior to this, hey, you know what? If your hand or your foot is giving you trouble, you just ought to cut it off and limp your way into the kingdom of heaven. If your eye is giving you trouble, if that's the way that your body is throwing you off, and your eye makes you look at things and lust after it or makes you greedy, just pluck it out and go in half blind. Does he mean it literally? No. But do you get how much your body is a hurdle to where God wants to take you? Sure, from the man himself. Yeah. It is going to be really, really hard work for you to retrain your body and to think in a new way about your traumas, about your pleasures, about your habits, about your anxieties and your fears and your stresses and your reactions to them. Yeah, it is going to be hard, hard work. In fact, there's a great contemporary writer named Dallas Willard who writes a lot about Christian spirituality and growth, and I will, in fact, on our Facebook page this week, post a couple of things by him on this subject. And he says to us, you need to be very wary, because oftentimes when Christian people come to Jesus and they're quote-unquote saved or converted, they think that their whole life is going to get squared away right away. And he says, yeah, that doesn't work. In fact, your body doesn't change. It's great that you made a decision to follow Jesus, but your body didn't change. And it still has all the history with you. It has all those ruts you've created. It has all those instincts that come natural to it. And you're going to spend the rest of your life having to retrain your body to follow the commitment you've made to Jesus. You see that? So think with me for a minute. If renewing the mind, thinking in a new way, is so crucial to getting past this particular blockage, how might that look for you? Well, it's going to depend on what your bodily passion is, right? What are you trying to get over? And that could be different depending on who you are in the room. Let's name some, just so they can be examples that you can have in the back of your mind when you think through how you can renew your mind this week as a way to combat your bodily passions. So, let's say you're somebody who, in a moment of high stress, tends to have that very neurological reaction that I described where you are incapable of thinking straight. And all of a sudden, in that moment, maybe it's somebody's mad at you, or it's work, or something's going wrong, you can feel like your brain just shorts out. Well, how can you think in a new way, in a Christ-like way, that would help you get past that? Maybe what you need to do in that situation is realize it's not all about you. Those people who are mad at work aren't necessarily mad at you. They're mad at the situation, or they're mad at each other, or they're mad that change can't be made that's meaningful to a situation that seems to be out of their hands. And you, because you're a human being and it comes natural to us, just think it's all about you. It's really not. What if in that moment you weren't worried about your own self-protection, but you were worried about protecting the other people in that room who very likely could get thrown under the bus too? It's amazing what happens in your mind. It's amazing what happens to your feelings when all of a sudden you start thinking about protecting somebody else instead of yourself. You'd be amazed how much it calms you down. Do you think you could do that? It seems like a very Jesus sort of way to handle it. But guess what? It gets you past your bodily passions. Maybe you need to request, hey, I need a 5-minute break. You know, we've been talking about whatever this is that's causing you to be really anxious and worried, and you just need to say, hey, I need to go to the restroom. We just need to take a 5-minute break or something. You need to go outside. You need to be quiet. You need to make your body still. You need to do what Peter said last week, and you need to cast the cares, the emotions that you feel, on God himself and allow him to settle you down before you go back in there and say something you're going to regret or detach entirely from the situation. This is all what renewed thinking looks like. Do you see that? What can you do? You have hurts, you have broken relationships, you have worries that shape you. They are instincts to you. How are you going to look at them different in order to move ahead? This is what Paul's describing in Ephesians 4. What's your worst worry? What's the thing that keeps you awake at night? Now you need to ask yourself, how are you going to think about that different? Because what comes natural to you is to lose sleep. And the more you lose sleep, the worse it's going to get. The heavier that weight's going to feel. You want to eat too little, you want to eat too much. You want to stop exercising. You want to stop praying. You want to stop talking to your family. What are you going to do different about that stress? Because the more you carry it, the more you focus on it, the more you're creating a rut, the more it becomes a bodily passion. What are you going to do about it? Because it's on you to change it. You have to retrain your body. What will you do? Take that person in your life who hurt you the worst, that worst trauma that you've had. Could be a divorce, could be being homeless, could be going bankrupt, could be losing a business. And it humiliated you. It embarrassed you. It made you so deeply afraid that you promised yourself you'd never go through it again. Now what are you going to do? How can you look at that different? How can you ask Jesus to look at it the way that maybe he does? What will you do? Your growth depends on it. Your ability to grow and move forward depends on your ability to look at and to process those bodily passions differently, to look at them the way God does, the way he would counsel you, so that you can move ahead. You see it? This is a blockage that all of us face. I will tell you, and just as an aside, I always think it's a good question to ask yourself and ask other people that you respect. So why are you a Christian? And I'm kind of with the Christian writer of today, Philip Yancey. I don't think my list of reasons are very long anymore. I will tell you one that has become more and more meaningful the older I get. And it goes back to something that St. Augustine said in the 300s. He said, all truth is God's truth. And the more you dig around and research and learn, you're going to find that the things that the ancient scriptures say, what some people would tell you is a very dated, ancient, obsolete book, have great grounding in what we've learned today. When I think about Paul telling me that I have to get past my bodily instincts and drives and find a new way of thinking that looks more like Jesus, I think that's true. Because I think what Paul was saying is verified by what you and I can find in a Google search about how neurology and brain chemistry and our bodies shape our behavior. Fascinating stuff. This is a blockage that you and I face. I want to finish today with these 3 quotes that will wrap up this discussion of the mind versus the body and the blockage that it can form. First comes from the creator of Star Trek, and I know at least that table right there will appreciate that Gene Roddenberry is making an appearance today. Gene Roddenberry once said, "We must question the story logic of having an all-knowing, all-powerful God who created faulty humans and then blames them for his own mistakes." You understand that what Paul is saying is very different than that. He is saying that just by their very nature, our bodies are exceedingly flawed, and they will respond to high stress or trauma or habit or even pleasure in ways that are very negative to us in the end. God's business is not that he made us that way. God's business is to rescue us from that. That's what Paul's saying. And one of the great movies of the last 20 years, a great myth, a great analysis of modern culture and the feelings of being trapped by it, The Matrix. One of the characters says in The Matrix, to deny our impulses is to deny the very thing that makes us human. Actually, Paul is saying the exact opposite. What makes you an animal is not to deny the impulses that you have. If you'd like to be an ape, knock yourself out. Don't deny the bodily impulses that we were talking about today. And you will be just like any other animal in the animal kingdom. What makes you human and where God is trying to take you is that you can deny those impulses and transcend them and become this new self that he is trying to create you to be. And last, from 3,000 years ago, I will give you this simple proverb from the Old Testament. As you think, you will be. What you think about, how you use your mind, where you focus, where you spend it, where you give its energy, that's who you're going to become. And for many of us, where our minds are spent are on those bodily impulses and drives that come so natural to us. Our fears, our worries, our repetitions, our hurts. But imagine if you could train your mind to go elsewhere, to focus elsewhere. You, in the end, would become a different person, just like Paul said you would. As you think, so you will be. Will you take a moment here at the end of the message? Maybe give God's Spirit the space to show you in your life some of the places where your own bodily reactions to things, your own deep-seated emotion and scars and habits are getting in the way of you becoming who Jesus dreams for you to be. And then why don't you allow God to spur you on to become more like that person? And after a moment or two in the quiet, I will pray for us all.